introduce each other right now because we have a couple of minutes, so we let people join the live stream. And then my name is Snorre, and I'm from Diwala, and also the host of the meetup. And we can continue with Adam.
Hello, my name is Adam. I'm from iTeam. Been working on Eigendata.
Leo.
Yeah, hi, my name is Leo Sandegasnier. I work for the Digitalization Directorate in Norway. Yeah.
Good.
Nice to meet you.
Nina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nina Mathisen. I work for the Norwegian Computer Society.
Cool. And then Christian.
Yeah, I'm from iTeam as well. It's Adam, working with Eigendata. I'm going to present a little bit about that.
Yes. And then we have Mikael.
Hi, yes, I'm Mikael. And I also work at iTeam with Eigendata.
Cool. We are currently missing our friend from Evernim. He's coming. He just messaged me, so he'll just hop in, and he's going to be third in the program, so that's not a problem. His name is Jamie Smith, and he's one of the head of product in Evernim. So he will share some information about what they're doing. Right now, I'll just do a quick intro to the meetup. I'll close the window real quick. The meetup has been going on for about a year now, and we have usually been doing this hi, Jamie. I usually been doing this in a live format, so we have been physically in a location in Norway, but actually having then international people join us for the conversation. Now we go full webinar, and the theme for today is what does your future identity look like? It will be Diwala, Evernim, and iTeam who will speak about their experience and their products. And this is a meetup held by Diwala, which is a company working in Uganda that was created in Norway, and working on the future of identity in the space of skills. So the agenda today is I'll just go through the welcoming, Diwala will speak, iTeam will speak, Evernim will speak, and then we'll have a visit from Din, which is both Leo and Nina. And then I have set up Hangouts that you guys everybody who watched the live stream can join afterwards, so we can have any discussions or questions extra that comes on the chat on the live stream, so we can have this nice meetup after we actually have been showcasing. So for the future of the meetup, we'll do a summer break after this one. We'd love to hear tips on topics in the feedback forum that I will share to the participants. Also, Din is a place where it's going to happen a lot of interesting work for the future. Feedback, I will send per message on the meetup. I will leave a comment in the YouTube description, and the shortened URL is at the end of this slide set. Community in Norway, particularly, it's Meetup and Diwala. It's Din, which we'll hear much more about. It's also this company called DIF, or with this organization. They are a technical working group, standardization group, which is international. They're going to have a really cool face-to-face virtual, which is available for everybody to join, not just members. So if you're really interested in the standards and technology, that's worth joining. There's also this organization called Trust Over IP. They are focusing much more on the governance, on the whole stack, not just parts of it. You'll hear more about this throughout the conversations with all the attendees here on the meetup. So we're not going to go into that there. And then you have this writing or page generating conference called Rebooting Web with Trust, where a lot of the thematics is around identity and and the issues we're going to discuss today. And what they do, they generate papers to try to start sparking ideas or working groups on different subjects. It's a really cool conference that goes over 3 to 4 days, and there's a lot of good ideas coming out of that. And then you have this workshop called Identity Workshop. It was held online now just recently. It's also a place where a lot of the international community meet up and come and discuss the really important subjects around what is identity on the internet. So if you want to bring some feedback to this meetup, go to this link afterwards, and then we will appreciate all the feedback we can get. So, and this is the water cooler link. I'll also share it once everybody's done speaking. Back to the program. We will start with introduction from Dwala on future identity. And that's me again. So I'll take over the screen again and talk about what I do believe the future of identity is. Give me 1 second here. There you go. Sorry, wrong button. You guys see it now? Perfect. I will also be watching if there's any questions coming in, so I can take that continuously. So since I'm presenting right now, the questions will take a little more, will be answered when I can, and I will also ask the questions on your behalf once presenters have time. So, what is your digital identity 5 years from now? I'm Snorre Lota von Gorin-Aduin. I'm the CTO at Dwala. I'm a decentralized identity nerd. I believe in a future where you control your data exchange. So, the evolution of identity has been okay. It's been really bad at Microsoft Passport times. We have gotten forward. We were really aiming at something once we looked at OpenID and all these standards that came at that point, but Google and Facebook did some really smart trickeries and took over the whole situation and turned it out to be the one identity provider online to be able to capture more data. You are able to self-host your own OpenID, but it's not very user-friendly. So we're at the space where everybody turns to Google and Facebook to be able to log in. I believe, and I think that many of the people in this meetup believe that at least within 5 years or even before, because we see people already doing a lot of good use cases and examples of how this can work, that we will have something called self-sovereign identity within 5 years. And Everton will talk a little bit more where and what they have been doing, and they have been doing some really, really, really great work. Digital identity today, they're administered by central authorities. We all know Google, Facebook. All Apple phone users use Apple. You have your Amazon identity, and you have the government identity, and there's a lot of identities out there, which is a problem. And there's also a lot of data flowing out to these actors. We're not going to get to a point where there's no data going, but we can at least try to get more control of it, be able to reuse it, and turn things around. So in Norway, particularly, we have Signicat, BankID, WIPS, which is all interlaced. We have this thing called ID-porten, which is also something that really helps the Norwegian society, but it's not optimal because they're just authenticators, and they don't provide any data, but they still take a lot of data because they know where you're going everywhere online. And then we can see that this type of centralized identity might have some problems. There's this episode we had in 2012 where everybody who logged into the governmental site became Kenneth, 36 years old. That was a bug in Altin, which was not optimal for the government. So why ask this question now? Like, in particular in Norway, it works, but why ask it now? So there's an increasing amount of hacks. You can see this bubble here, like even in 2012 compared to 2019, there's a lot of more hacks going on, a lot of more data breaches, and it's not going to stop because more and more people go digital, more and more people create their own data silos, and this is not going to stop anytime soon. So we need to be able to cater to that. GDPR has come. This is a way to bring focus on that the owner should be aware of data. Everything it does is data, and everything the owner of or the user should be able to control in some kind of way. Today, there are portals that allows you to export your data. It doesn't provide much value. You are allowed to delete yourself. It's like first step to take control that, okay, I don't want to exist here, so at least take me off. But we need to get to a place where we can have much more interlaced data movement, and also not that everybody creates their own identity to give to the user, but the user brings his own identity. And I think it's there's a term that's been coined that's called bring your own identity, and that's going to be a very, very hot topic in the next couple of years. And also you have My Data that has a really, really great philosophy. They do a lot of good thought work, and they speak loud, and they're out there talking. They're really pushing this forward. But there's also has to be proper implementation, test use cases, and everything, which a lot of these companies that we're gonna hear from today will talk a little bit more about and how they have done it. Also, particularly in Norway, there's a Altinn, which is a governmental agency that they talk about today. In Norway, we have a very high trust into the government. Things move, things change. We see that other countries don't have the same trust as the Norwegians do in their government. So there's going to be a change, and we need to prepare for that. They also released this concept called Digital Me, which we also will hear a little bit about from Leo afterward during the DIM talk. But that was something really interesting, that a governmental agency went in and digged into what is a true digital me. Also, the world is you're becoming more and more global citizen. You are not really, let's say, the borders are just borders. You see more and more remote work, and at least after this COVID situation, people are more enticed to work at home, and working at home also means you can work from any country you want. So things are changing. We are moving in a direction where the globe is becoming smaller and smaller, and you're not dependent to be in one place. So a data exchange today, you have the user on the left side. If you want to log in and share some data, and then that person who is the service, he needs a request. If you, for example, use Facebook or Google, he needs to request the data for someone, and then you have to accept some obscure data requests. And sometimes we don't even understand completely what we accept. We just get a letter in the email to inform us. And that particular scenario is actually how it works with credit scoring in Norway. You just get a letter afterwards saying, hey, we just looked at your credits, or this company just looked at your credit score to make sure that you're eligible for service X. And why is it like that? Why does it have to be that complicated. It can be much, much simpler. So why is this scenario happening? Why can't it be more peer-to-peer happening than have to go via the third party right over there? Because today we have a lot of personal data and reputation locked up by big corps. Personal data information is collected and sold. If particular service you're very dependent on shuts down, you can basically become a digital refugee. And also there's a very high overuse of identifiers, and people think that, or really feel that a social security number is very scary to share online, and I agree. If it becomes available, there's a high chance for fraud. So there's a lot of problems happening today, and what I believe the future of identity will solve. So this is the pipeline I would like to see. There is a service that issues data, the user receives it, and it shares data with the person or the service that needs it. And the issuing party has not been is not involved in any transactions at a later point. So what's the brilliant idea? What can we do? I like to call it the big switcheroo, where we actually go from this scenario into more a scenario where we talk about putting this user in the middle. We talk about that why should the big corps work as a data bank for you? Why can't there be a much better infrastructure where you have your own data bank that you trust, and you can choose whatever service you want, but it works across the whole internet? That's where self-sovereign identity comes in. There's some really nice principles for self-sovereign identity. We're not going to go through them all, but they were initially announced with Christopher Allen, one of the SSL authors, back in 2016, I believe, or 2015. And it's basically primarily an ideology to reclaim human dignity and authority in a digital world, because today we cannot behave as we do in the physical world in the digital world. And it's a very growing architecture of emerging technology designed to enable that movement. And that's what I'm going to quickly touch upon. And I think that Jamie from Evernym will also talk about how they're actually building and also putting it into the user's hands. So there's a lot of movement going on. As I also mentioned in the early introduction, you have the trust over IP, DIF, a lot of members. You have W3C standards happening. You have other important companies looking at this, My Data, Rebooting Web Trust. So this becomes a little bit duplicate as I had the introduction, but it's really key to make a movement, to make things go forward. I also now realize I should have put DIN here, because DIN is a Nordic initiative to build awareness and facilitate the development of this in the Nordics, because if DIF and Trust over IP works internationally, they kind of might forget about little Nordic, and that's where DIN comes in. Let's see, there you go. So I like to say that this is the holy triangle of the current standards. And how we're able to enable this technology wise. It's a verifiable credentials, it's a decentralized identifier, and you have the private secure data vaults and DIDCOM, which is still in early phases, but we see the importance of them. So there's a stack that kind of comes in, which is really crucial. We see that there's complexity. We see that there's a lot of work that has to be done, but in the bottom layer here, there's a ledger, and that's also part of being able to make this possible. Is that the data, the identifier, the decentralized identifier, should not be necessarily stored in Facebook, because then we're just back to square one. And that's where blockchain have enabled this new way of thought, this new way of open data layer for your identifier, which enables a lot more. You have layer 2 where the user will live and control his wallet, and then layer 3 is where there will be companies building services and exchanging data, enabling issuers and verifiers to be able to trust each other peer-to-peer without having to be a data provider after you issue data, because you have issued the data and then that should be able to be proof-worthy outside of your own database because of this standard called verifiable credential. And then there's this thing called governance. We're not going to go deep into that, but there's a lot of legal framework, trust framework, and a lot of stuff that has to come in place to make sure that this works in a proper community, and also it works on a global scale. So the root problem is the identifier. This is a fake driver's license, but it's a Norwegian one. Like, where do we begin? We have the problem of inappropriate use of or overuse of identifiers. It's difficult to manage identifiers. It's being outsourced. It's centralized. And how can we could have said that, hey, Facebook, go make an identifier that the whole world will use, so we can just use your guys' identifier, and then everything would be easy to do. But that would give a lot of control back to Facebook, because they would work as that one controlling instance who would say yes or no, or basically verify if someone asks, is this identifier connected to this person? And to date, you basically don't own, or every identifier used online does not belong to you. It belongs to someone else. It can be taken away, and if data is connected to that identifier, as we talked about, you can become a digital refugee. So just to kind of highlight, you don't own your email. You run around online using email as an identifier. You run online using your phone number as an identifier. Those are very, let's call easy to lose. They're easy to hack, and if they are your sole identifier, and they're also not very based on cryptography. So there's a very weak link right there. Your birth number, people are not very willing to share that, so it's not an optimal way of identifying. And then also you get a new identifier every time you go somewhere. You get a work email, which you need to manage, and how you have a work identifier you need to manage, and it becomes complicated for an average user. And this is part of what SSI wants to also make much, much more simpler. So what is it? It is a simple unknown string like this. It's globally unique. We don't have to go into the depths of this, but this method thing is where the ledger comes in. This is particularly an Ethereum identifier, but it's a way for us to be able to build identifiers that belong to the user. And this is also where both the issuer, the verifier, and the holder, they own their own DID. They own their own identifier, making it possible to actually create and manage the identifiers much easier. You can give it to individuals, organizations, even things. And then it's also, because of the ledger, you can resolve and understand who and what owns this. No need to go into the depths of the resolving, but it brings us to the next step for verifiable credential. Because if you don't have a proper identifier for data that we want to packet and put outside a database, we cannot verify who is the actual belonging, or the person that belongs to that data. So this, we can take the whole driver's license, packet it into a verifiable credential, where we use right now the SSN as a decentralized identifier, different metadata, and there's issuer signatures. Now you can just say that this is all the graphics on a driver's license. Today, a hand signature is often used as a verification process. I can say that my signature is very different every time. I've kind of stopped using that as a proper verification process. But how this kind of works is that your decentralized identifier uses cryptography. And cryptography is the interlink between everything here. So the issuer issues this verifiable credential with his decentralized identifier. He signs that credential with a cryptographic key. He also issues this to that user's identifier, because once that user goes into a service, he's asked to share his one identifier to be allowed to enter, so they know that where we can issue data. Once the user wants to share his data somewhere else to a verifier, he can countersign that to prove that, hey, the person you're now digitally talking to is actually the one that's mentioned inside this verifiable credential, so you can trust that this is actually belonging to me. And then the verifier, all that he has to do is to trust the issuer that he thinks that the data coming from that particular issuer is trustworthy. That's part of the governance layer in this whole scenario. So let's just put an example in Norway, so it's a little bit more understandable, because I know it's very it's technical, it's words, it's high level. But let's say a user let's kickstart self-sovereign identity in Norway. A user gets a DID through an open standard application, which in the community now calls a wallet. It goes to a site that allows for a bank ID verification. Bank ID created this site, which they back up with or which they give themselves DID through graphical means. Bank ID, after verified with the normal centralized version, signs out the verifiable credential with their DID, or signs out one or multiple credentials identifying traits about this user. And that's where the user receives his data and stores it in his standardized secure storage. It shouldn't have to belong inside the database of bank ID. It should belong to the user. So once this has happened, the user is now free to run around online, not be dependent on bank ID. Bank ID can collapse, and we can still trust the data that was once issued. But the user can now go and identify himself, and people can trust that, oh, he was this person. He have this authority level because bank ID said it. And today we all trust bank ID. So then when you go to a bank, it's called bank ID because it was initially created by the banks. So it's kind of elementary that we take in a bank example here. You go with the standardized secure storage, you go to a bank, you basically click sign in, and that's where DIDCOM comes in. You open a cryptographical standardized communication. They're gonna implement standards of exchange verification, and they ask you to share this one verifiable credential that was given to your secure storage by bank ID. And then you share it, and you're allowed to go into the service. So some key elements here is that no phone home database means that bank ID doesn't know that you log into DNB. Today, Facebook knows everywhere you log in with Facebook, and that also gives them the possibility to actually build their advertising portal. Because if you log into 15 sites that talks about kiting, they're going to give you an advertisement about kiting, right? So they know where you are, they follow you. So there's no possibility for surveillance. I'm not saying that bank ID and VIPs and Signicard does this today, but you at least remove that possibility. And also, one of my estimations is that there will be less need for heavy infrastructure, because there wouldn't be 1 million calls to bank ID every day to log in. It would be distributed among a lot of entrepreneurial companies who would host these secure storages on behalf of the user, and then they would take parts of the load, but they will share that data that BankID now has a heavy infrastructure holding. And I talked to guys at the ID-porten, a Norwegian company, and they were like, yeah, we spend a lot of millions just for having this 2 million requests going in every day just to say yes to a simple question that could be answered in a different way. And it also enables a lot more flexibility because you're not dependent on this one simple source. Yeah, I just talked about ID-porten. So there's the ID-porten can then focus on what they do best instead of having to have infrastructure that could have been solved much better with a self-sown identity solution. There's a lot of social economical cost cuts for central parties to host infrastructure. Things can become much more secure with principal end-to-end encryption. You will move a lot of important data to the leaf nodes, like to the ends of the circle instead of the middle of the circle, and then it makes it a lot more difficult to hack. Because you have to hack everyone in the outer circle instead of the one in the middle circle, and we can look at a much more efficient data exchange. DNB can start issue financial proof, deposit proofs as delivered credit proofs, and become a more dependent infrastructure. And the new, which is a school, can give out digital diplomas and even give it out as a grant level as a per course basis. And this also means that once you receive this digital diploma in a verifiable credential way, it will live forever in a digital space. Even if NTNU lost their database, you will still have your proof and it can be verified historically. So you're not dependent on your school to survive to have a credential that said you did X, which is very positive. So we're not alone on this. A lot of interesting work is happening. W3C, DIF, EU is doing really interesting work. DIN is now doing really interesting work. And there's a lot of use cases we can learn from, which we'll hear from both iTeam and Evernym. And there's a lot of, let's say, proven materials that comes out of these initiatives, and we just need to do the work to get here. But there's a lot of work that has to be done. We need more live tests, and we need more smart people on this. The community today, when I got into it about 1.5 years ago, it was very small. It has grown, but it needs diversity. It needs the smart people to kind of come together and work on this. And I say that we are behind in Scandinavia, but that's also where I think that the DIN initiative will really bring us up to speed, and not have one centralized source in Norway becoming the expert, but really facilitating a good movement. So yeah, this is not the right slide, but I'm done. Let's see if there's any questions from YouTube. Right now, there's none. So we can take it over to you, Adam.
Yes, I think Christian is going to start.
Yep.
I'll
Sorry.
No worries. Just gonna share my screen. So, do you see this now? The slide, the Egen data. Yeah. All right. So thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having us here. I think it's wonderful to have this discussion, and also, as you say, collaborate within the Nordics to strengthen our work. And I'm not entirely sure that the last slide that we are behind. I think in many cases, I think we actually in Scandinavia we are working a lot on these questions, and I think that we have been a lot of interesting things, but it's very fragmented yet. So I think by doing this type of collaboration and joint efforts, I think we're going to get much further really quickly. So I hope that we will be able to continue this conversation. So I will do a short presentation about what Egen data is and why we started it, and then for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to spend 10 minutes to look at the actual demo, and hopefully that works. It's still what we are talking about here is an ongoing project, and it's an open source project. So I will share you a little bit about that now. And my colleagues Adam and Mikael will do the demo in a little bit. So the reason why we started this was we were working. First of all, I should do a little bit of presentation about ourselves. We are from a consulting company called iTeam, and we work together with Arbetsförmedlingen, which is the Swedish public employment service, and we created a site for them for matching newly arriveds and refugees to the job market, labor market in Sweden. But after half a year, when we had launched the project, some smart journalists were looking into the security and the legal framework for doing this type of service in the first place, and they realized that it's a problem from a legal standpoint to gather data about refugees because of some conflicting legal problems. We realized that we can't really do it in that way that we were doing it before. So that meant that we had to think outside the box and find a different way to kind of gather data about the users and share them with the job market. So the key problems we were seeing was that between the transparency laws that are governing the government has to obey, and also the personal privacy, those were not compatible for refugees during the time when they were applying for asylum. And as we know, data access and data quality is key for an efficient job market today. You can't really match yourself on the job market if you're not allowed to gather data. So that was kind of a struggle for us. And also, there's a lot of lock-in mechanisms, big players that are centralized all these data storages for, as you were mentioning in your presentation, Snorre. So that's also a problem that we included in this project. And the holy grail that we were searching for, and this project started 2 years ago. So the holy grail, we set it out to be like this: a secure, decentralized data streams where the end user has full control. That was the key goal for us, or pipe dream that we were searching for. And you have already explained about this. Like, instead of every service is gathering information about each user, we would rather see a opposite way around. Like, every user could share data or have a place for each service that has the ability to store their own data within the user space, and then let the user choose whether or not to share the data between these storages. And we think that can enable a lot of new innovation and solve a lot of problems. And especially in this case, we thought that this was a proper way to solve our problem with a legal framework, because in this place we don't have to, as the public agency, don't have to store any data at all about the user, but the user itself could store its own data and then decide to share it with an employer or another company, or Monster, Stepstone, or any other matching services on the market. So the way that we pretty early started, the hypothesis we had was that if we are using encryption data, we should be able to ensure privacy. And then we also started with a hypothesis that everyone has their own mobile phone, so that's a good location for storing the encryption keys. And by using encryption keys and encrypted data, we thought that this could be a good way for us to solve it. So this is the kind of the goals that we were trying to fulfill. So I'm going to go through the thought process of finding out the way to enable this. So if we just take a very simple example, if we have two services on the right side, this could be two job matching services and or public agencies or anything like that. They want to store and share data about the user. So the first naive approach is, of course, to kind of store data on the user's device. That's pretty much the way that cookies are working today. Or in the early days of internet, we were storing data on diskettes or on our own hard drives. So that was working pretty good for a long time. And the user was in control, and the user could share, choose whether or not to share it between the two services. So this is a valid model. But of course, this is not working in an online scenario. If you want to be matched to a new job when you're not have your phone available, then the user or the service can't read your data. So then we introduce cloud storage, and pretty much this is how the internet works today. You are sharing your data and you store it somewhere. This could be Facebook, this could be LinkedIn, and you could the service or the cloud storage could decide whether or not they should share the data to another service that asks for it. And you are pretty much out of the picture because they can decide for you all these choices. So the next step would be to encrypt the data. If you encrypt it with a key, you could at least have some sort of control over it. But still, where do you store the keys? If you store the keys on the same place as the rest of the data, then you're pretty much back to square one. So if you introduce a new part of this architecture, and we call this the operator, the data operator, and this is terminology coming from my data initiatives, and also the PDS. So if you have a data operator and then separate the actual data storage from the operator, you could pretty much have at least a little bit of control about this information. But still, you have the problem where you can store the keys. So this is actually how we ended up. So if we have each service could produce a QR code, and within this QR code, you can store the actual key, and that key will be exchanged between the server or the service and the user, and then the data between that is stored on your device or in the cloud storage and the PDS. It's always encrypted when you store it. But it's encrypted with these keys. And as long as you keep these keys separated from the data, you could actually put this PDS anywhere. You could put this on the cloud storage, on Facebook or Google or Dropbox or on iCloud or on your own hard drive or in IPFS or in blockchain or whatever. It doesn't really matter where you store the data itself. It could be distributed wherever. But because as long as you don't store the keys in the same place, you should be fine. So this is the end result. This is where we ended up, and we have been talking a lot about in this project. About things that we don't have to take care of, and you started talking a little bit about identity, and from our point of view, we see that identity is actually less important than the actual storage. If you have a secure way to store your data and you have a way to handle your own keys, you could pretty much store any identity information in that storage, and if you are able to share this data between different services, you can actually verify those yourself by introducing or letting people or services in to read your identity information. So in many ways, we could see this as a lower level of implementation from the rest of the stuff that you were talking about, the DIDs and everything else. As long as you have a secure place to store your own DID, and a way to share that DID between different services. Our idea is that we don't have to really, take into consideration how those identity tokens are generated. So in our case, in Sweden, we could pretty much let Skattemyndigheten be one of those services that stores data about you in your own storage. Which means that if you want to log into some other service using that information, you could just let some other service read your data within that folder that Skattemyndigheten has signed for you, which means that they can trust that you have this information, you have the keys for that, and they can verify that Skattemyndigheten has signed this with their public key. And that means that we somehow could actually implement digital identity on top of this framework. So this is some screenshots of this app, and we have actually built all of this, and all of this is on GitHub, and we are using only open source components, so I'm gonna let Mikael and Adam to show you how it looks.
Actually, we have some technical problems. Maybe you can talk a little bit more, just.
Yeah. So the demo just broke.
Okay, that's usual.
Yeah. So now the realities are in sync, because the actual environment that we had running was not working today, but it worked locally on Michael's machine. So we decided let's just run the demo there. But now we have the exact same problem there. So I guess we have consistency now.
Okay.
The demo goes is always interesting.
We can replicate the problem.
Yeah. But Adam, maybe you can fill in a little bit about the different standards and the ways of signing and everything that we've been using.
Yeah, so I was gonna talk over the demo and explain what actually happens, but
We can let Evernym talk and let you guys spend another 20 minutes get prepared, and then we can have
we can see if that works.
good.
Otherwise, I can just say the things I was gonna say during the presentation. But
But it sounds fitting if you talk over the demo. So if you guys can spend 20 minutes to see if you're able, and then we can try again. Perfect. Jamie,
Thanks.
you here?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, excellent. Let me get my wildly underprepared slides ready ahead of time. Give me a second. Okay, so I'm going to cover a bit about the Evernym perspective and why we think it's different, and I'm going to talk through a couple of case studies, a couple of examples, and then talk a bit about how we make those possible. So let me, I'm not going to use the magic of the internet to try and share my screen in a way that I'm not familiar with, so bear with me.
It's in the lower left corner, so sharing a screen.
Nice. Okay, so I'm hopeful that you can now see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Is that okay?
No, it's still loading, it seems.
Where are you calling in from, Jamie?
I'm calling it. Well, I'm in the UK.
Great.
All right. So let me know when that shows up on your screen, and then I can.
If you try to stop and try again and choose another tab or something, it seems.
Give me a second. Let me see if I can do that now. Okay. Let's try this. So you're going to see yourselves and then the Evernym slide. Does that work?
Nope, not yet.
One more go. Give me a second. I'm going to try and share my whole screen, see if that works. Apologies, everyone.
No problem.
Right, I'm going to share my entire screen. Bold, you might say. You see that I've really been on Facebook this whole time, Snora. Right, try again. Does that work?
Nope. Maybe
Maybe turn off your camera first.
Maybe refresh and try again. Is there something lagging up? Because last time it started to do something. It started to at least become gray, but it didn't show.
So before it tried. Okay, it tried and failed. I'm going to try one last time, and then if not, I might just start my screen again. So it says I'm sharing.
Yeah, it's gray. It's very strange.
That is so strange.
Yeah.
Technical challenges, left, right, and center. Give me a sec. I'm gonna leave and join, and I'm hopeful it's gonna work. 1 second.
Maybe some browser issues. We all know those.
Would it help if you turned off this camera, do you think?
No, this seems like the connection isn't created because it says it's sharing but never sends the data. Are you back?
Okay. I'm back. One last go.
Or else we can continue on with Din, and then we can go back to anyone in chat can say, hey, let's try again. And then in the meantime, everybody try.
What a pain. I wonder if it needs a plugin or something. I'm doing the share. One last time, application window. It says I'm sharing, but it's not working.
No. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Yay.
Are we in?
Yes.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. How many people have we got on, by the way?
We have been up to 15, 16. So it's going a little bit up and down.
Okay, great. So you can now see that.
Yep.
What I'll do is I'll leave it in this. I don't want to break anything, so I won't make it go full screen, and then we can, in fact, let me try. Let's just play with the gods and see if that works.
It works.
Yes, right, okay. So thanks for having me on, Snorra. Evnim has been in this space since 2014. A lot of the technology that's being used around the world for self-sovereign identity or verifiable credentials or decentralized identifiers has kind of come through a lot of the work we've been doing. A guy in our business called Drummond Reed was, I think together with Digital Bazaar wrote 90% of the method spec for DIDs. So we go really deep on this. We co-chair the working group on DIDs at W3C. We're heavily involved with the verifiable credential working groups, and we're in all over the world. And I'll talk a bit about what we do and our view. But let me kind of step through why we think things are broken. Our perspective, it's kind of a very similar summary that Snorra gave at the beginning, but with a bit of a twist on why we think it's happening now and why we think the other solutions are so broken. And then I'll talk about use cases, and then I'll get on to kind of the Evnim offer, if you like.
Perfect.
So I don't need to rehearse this argument again, really, but identity is critical, but it's completely broken. One of my favorite ways of putting it is, when our robot overlords come and take over the world, it's going to be fine because we're going to have to make them press on buttons of, bridges and traffic lights and photos to make sure they're real, which of course is ridiculous. It's the idea that that everything we're doing in identity today is a workaround. Holding 15 different documents or cards in our wallet or our real wallets, having to use hundreds of usernames and passwords, and the easier they are to remember, the easier they are to steal, and the harder they are to remember, the harder they are to steal, but then it's really hard to manage. And of course, it's just a disaster in terms of who's got our data, GDPR, blah, blah, blah. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. This was an EU-funded project to look at what it would take for a digital identity to open a UK bank account with a French ID. There are 9 boxes. So this is OIX, the Open Identity Exchange, the high priests of the identity world, the identirati. And they concluded over 6 months that this is the answer. This is the best we can do. There are 9 boxes. All of those boxes are a kind of legal entity that needs money, has transactions and creates friction, that needs to agree a standard. And of course, the customer is nowhere on this picture. So when we give it to the best people in identity with the existing tools, we get this picture. And we think it should be way, way simpler. And we think there needs to be a couple of things. One is very just simply a protocol, a handshake, so I can connect with any other entity, whether that's a person, an organization, or a thing. And we can share our identity information, or frankly, any information, privately, securely, blah, blah, blah. So that's where our work in 2014-15 started, about having a protocol that could make that possible. And that's where decentralized identifiers appeared. It's where verifiable credentials appeared. And of course, this couldn't just be an Evnim thing. If it became an Evnim thing, we failed, because this has to be work for any person, organization, or thing. It can't be a world where you can only have it if you work with Evnim. There needs to be open standards, open source, open governance, so that we have competitors by design. I think we've spent something like $20 million of other people's money building all this stuff and giving it away. So it now sits in the Hyperledger Foundation under Hyperledger Indy and Hyperledger Ares. And on that journey, we actually gave it to the Sovereign Foundation first, and then it was open sourced to, or given to Hyperledger. So we wrote and invented Hyperledger originally back in 2015. And that's where we believe that those open source, open standards were going to be important, because it can't just be Evinem. It needs to be us and a whole range of other startups, plus IBM, Microsoft, Cisco, blah, blah, blah. And Evinem does two things. It gives tools for organizations to be able to do stuff, and individuals to be able to do stuff with these cool new tools. And the very simple perspective is that you've got an issuer, a holder, and a verifier. In this case, ESB is an electricity board. Dave is somebody who wants to get a utility bill, and IL was a verifier, a relying party I've been working with. So you've got the issuer kind of signs a credential, gives it to Dave, and then Dave's got his credential, the utility bill that proves his address and other things about him, and then he can share that because he countersigned it. This is what Snorre presents at the beginning. I'm going to touch on this picture, which is the trust over IP stack that Snorre pointed to before, and I point to it because credentials are useless unless you know that you can trust them. And not just technical trust, as in who gave them to you technically, where did the DIDs come from, but trust it in terms of what are they approved to issue it, and what was the circumstances under which they issued it, and what if they got it wrong? That needs a governance framework. Can I use any wallet? Is it the one I built in my bedroom, or is it one that's been approved and been audited to make sure there's no backdoor to an Israeli intelligence officer? What about the credential exchange? So who gets to use them in what context? So KYC data, know your customer data, there are very specific rules about who gets to consume them. I don't get to just show up with Snorre Water Company as my address proof. So there are rules, and we need to understand not just what credentials are issued by whom and where and when, but also under what circumstances are they allowed to be used. And so right down at the governance framework level, which ledger are we going to be using? Is it Bitcoin and Ethereum, which has no governance? Technical trust, lots of technical trust, and anyone can participate, hugely powerful. But Bitcoin was designed for money. Ethereum was designed for apps. Neither were designed for identity. And if you speak to a bank or a government or a healthcare company, they won't touch it with a barge pole because those entities aren't regulated. Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, could decide to fork Ethereum tomorrow. And where does that leave all those DIDs that have been anchored there? So you need human governance as well as technical trust. And so again, next to each of these layers, so here's the technical trust. Next to it is governance. It says who gets to run the ledger? Who are those individuals? How do we know we can trust them? Where are they in the world? What are their what's their incentive model? Then on wallets and agents, which is what's really on this thing. So we talk about DIDCOM as a protocol, but really this layer is about the wallets and agents, which is where the credentials are residing, and who gets to run those, and what apps can we use, and are they interoperable, and what's the governance for that? Then credential exchange or data exchange, and we need frameworks around that, but there'll be many and varied ones. There'll be those that govern healthcare credentials in Norway will be different to those that govern healthcare credentials in the US. And how are they interoperable? Does it matter? What if an individual travels from one country to the other for KYC purposes and says, well, I've got a bank account in Norway, can I use that in the US? Well, maybe if the protocols can agree, technically that's fine. But a governance framework, all we need is the glue that says, well, you've been through these processes, I can accept them. So suddenly the stuff that's happening across digital single market in the EU and trust frameworks across different countries allow us to have complete data portability. So it's a little in the weeds, and it's non-technical and a bit dry, but it's really important because otherwise we can't trust the credentials that we're moving around. So this is Evenem's perspective, and that same guy that set up or kind of invented the DID method spec, Drummond Reed, is now the executive director of the Trust Over IP Foundation. So we're one of the founding members of Trust Over IP Foundation, along with MasterCard, IBM, and a great number of others. I'll touch on some of the use cases just to bring it to life. So we come out of the technical and into kind of real life. The first good one that we think is really powerful is in the US. So 1 in 3 American citizens has a credit union account. It's a bit like a co-op where there's, you know, kind of local banks all around the country for local areas that are really small, very manual and paper-based, and they kind of accept other credit union members if you travel around the US. And so the credit unions got together and said, we need to do something with ledgers. And so they created an organization called CU Ledger, Credit Union Ledger. And they said, look, identity can't be done by these kind of local organizations. We need the power of our whole federation. So they created a thing called My CU ID, Credit Union ID, which is a credential. And the CU Ledger have created a digital wallet for all their members. And you can use that to call in, log in, or walk in. Because actually, it's the same thing. Whether you're scanning a QR code on the website, or you're showing up face-to-face in branch. In fact, in the age of coronavirus, we've got demos of, or it's live, where you can drive up, tap your phone to say I want to share a credential, and then you can authenticate yourself. But it's not just log in and walk in, but also call in. So in a contact center, right now when you call the credit union, it takes somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes to verify who you are. You know, sometimes called knowledge-based authentication, KBA. You know, mother's maiden name, cat's favorite color, date of birth. And with this, instead, you call the call center, and the agent in that call center presses a button on their screen. Your phone goes ping and says, are you on the phone to the call center right now? And I say, yes. And then I'm in, and that takes 5 seconds. So huge value for the call centers, for the contact centers, but also just great customer experience. And it's the same digital wallet wherever I'm going, call in, log in, walk in. So that's in kind of late pilot, nearly production stage. In the UK, there's been a whole bunch of stuff, especially with, you know, one of the problems with this whole thing is, the expression I use is, if Amazon or the delivery companies have what's sometimes described as a last mile problem. Like, I can get the parcel near you, but getting it to your door is 10x harder. In SSI, we've got a first mile problem. Why is a user going to download a new app or a digital wallet for the first time, get a credential, and what are they going to do with it? So one of the things we've done is we've partnered with a company called Onfido, and Onfido do digital document verification. So you can take a photo of your driving license and prove that it's real. And it's used all over the world, 160 countries, I think. But they use it for like online, to open a bank account with a mobile phone, for example, do it remotely. Anyway, we've partnered with them, and in our app, which I'll come to in a minute, they essentially become an issuer. So you can, with the app, say, I'd like to verify my documents. Take a photo of your passport or your national ID or your driving license, and then they will issue you a credential that's come from Onfido. Why is that relevant? Well, number one, I can prove I'm over 18 and all that good stuff, portably, you know, verifiably. But I can also go and open up accounts with regulated banking products, you know, loans, savings accounts, mortgages, whatever. And so we've done this idea of portable KYC with Onfido, and Deloitte have been involved. And why it's even more interesting is this project's been with the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, so the financial regulator, who created the FCA. So you created a sandbox, a place to kind of come in and show that your technology works and it's regulated, kind of compliant. So that work's completed now, and we'll be talking about that in kind of PR and stuff soon. But essentially, you can go to, you know, company one, you know, would you like to share your information? Scan a QR code. Would you like to share some information to open an account? Tap yes. That's it. I then go to the second account, and rather than having to have a different process or a different technology, same thing, scan the QR code. Do you want to connect? Yes. Well, to open an account, would you like to share some information? Yes. What's really cool about that project is some very expensive big company lawyers looked over the model, and they've concluded that the liability model for moving identity data around doesn't change. So if you go into a bank today with a paper version of your utility bill to say, I live here, here's my bank account, or here's my utility bill, there is no different if you show up with a verifiable credential to your bank and do it remotely. The liability model doesn't change, and that's critical. Lastly, probably most relevant for coronavirus, in a coronavirus context, we've been working with a company called True, TRUU, who are two doctors. One is a surgeon, and one is an infectious diseases specialist who specializes in coronavirus. So it's like the coronavirus world and credentials kind of came together. And today it takes something like a day to onboard a doctor to a hospital, saying, hey, we need you urgently. Can you come in, bring your passport, medical license, qualifications, right to work, proof that you've had hepatitis B injection, blah, blah, blah. With this, we can put all those credentials on our phone, show up to hospital's HR function, scan the QR code, and be onboarded in about 5 minutes. In fact, the sharing takes 15 seconds, but then they process it in their systems. So hugely valuable, and we're scaling that out with the National Health Service in the UK at the moment to many, many, many doctors, hopefully. So that's been kind of part of our coronavirus response, if you like. I'll pause because I can talk about the solutions that make that work in Evanim's perspective, but are there any questions or thoughts or comments?
I would love to hear, like, is there any about that lawyer is it resolution? Is that open, or is it like a closed?
Not yet. It's all being written up into a project and then released.
Yeah.
Before coronavirus, I was heard it was weeks away. So life changes. I don't know where it's got to right now, but I know that we will be making the results public. I think that's one of the biggest conclusions, that even if you get away from identity information, if a relying party has a liability to say we need to, if you think about opening a bank account, if you turn up with a water bill or a utility bill, the bank is relying that the electricity company did it right, that they checked it really was Sonora, and they issued the bit of paper to the right person with the right information. So there's a liability there that we're trusting another organization. And in this credential world, it's the same thing. We're still trusting them, that they got it right, that they issued the right credential to the right person. And I think if I just open it out a little bit, there's kind of two types of project going on. Project one, where all we're doing is we're credentialifying an existing process. We're doing something that happens today, like issuing a degree, or giving a driving license, or a utility bill, or a movie ticket, or a bus pass. We're doing it today, it's just we're giving it as a credential. So great customer experience, much better security, lower fraud. That's type one. Type two, we're doing something completely new. We've never given that type of credential out before. And so in the existing type one, there's existing policies, existing governance, existing regulation. So all we're doing is kind of making it better version of what we do today.
That's good.
Shall I spend 5 minutes on our solutions, or do you want to jump into some of the other speakers? I'm aware I've probably gone for 20 minutes, maybe 25.
You can do 5 minutes. No problem.
All right. So how do we make that possible? Well, we have a tool called Verity, which is essentially the tool for enterprise. So they can issue any type of credential. Essentially, the issuer gets to decide. They can create custom schema, whatever, for whatever they want. They can then create requests, proof requests. And so if you've got an application form, you can say, well, we need this information, and create a connection and request that from a user. This is really cool. and one of my favorite things about this whole movement, we talk about SSI, we talk about credentials, we talk about identity, but actually, once I've got that peer-to-peer connection with a user, if I'm a business, I could do all sorts of stuff over that. I don't have to send just identity information. So say I've onboarded them, I could send messages. So one of the things our tools allow is for you to ping a user's wallet, and for you to know that it's absolutely gone to that wallet. So think about that bank experience again, or telco. How often have you received an email saying you have a new message? You've got to log into the bank's inbox, go to your account page, find the message, and do something with it. Because they can't rely on inboxes and email, SMS, it's not secure. With this, you could message the wallet and know it's gone to exactly the right person and know that they got it. And better, the individual with their digital wallet can say yes, no, or whatever. And that message gets cryptographically signed and sent back. So you could say, are you at this ATM right now trying to draw 500 euros? Yes, I am. Or no, I'm not. So fraud, massive, huge opportunity. This stuff on the side about, kind of survey stuff, we're trying to find information about you, but that's cryptographically verifiable. But you could also imagine a government saying, hey, you've got a visa to work in this country for the year. It expires in 3 months. Would you like to extend it for another 6 months by paying $100 or 100 euros? Yes, I would. Tap. So no visits to an embassy, no more queuing, no more online paperwork. That's it. It's cryptographically verifiable, meaning I've got an audit trail, so it's like a wet signature. Very cool. So we've got that messaging capability. And then, of course, you've got login. So we've got bridges to turn a credential into an OpenID Connect object, if you like. So that means this is an overlay to all the Active Directory stuff that already exists in big businesses. But where an individual wants to log in, you click on the, there's a login username and password as normal. Another button next to it saying log in with your wallet. Click on that. A QR code is a challenge really for the credential you have. You scan the QR code, your phone goes ping saying, are you trying to log in? You say yes, and then you're in. So that again is in its early stages of development, but the people are using it for login already in the open source, and we'll be building it into our products very shortly. I think that's it. So that's the enterprise side, and on the individual side, consumer citizens, we've got Connect.me is our kind of reference app. It's in the app stores right now, and that on Fido, by the way, that on Fido check, you can go and download Connect.me from iOS or Android stores. You can get the wallet, open it up, and then inside settings, it's slightly hidden, but you can go into settings and get your documents verified by Onfido. So it's live. It's like full GDPR, full live, full production. Go get your ID. You can't use it anywhere yet, but it shows you actually working. And if you have a customer or there's an organization who already has an app, or you're building an app and you want to put all the features of our wallet inside your app, then we have an SDK. So you can put all the same things. So it basically means you can control the UI top to bottom. That was probably 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear you guys talk about what stuff you've been doing, Jamie. And
it's going bananas. I think we're in the foothills of the explosion of what's about to happen. Everything needs to be remote now. Everything needs to be trusted at a distance. All the organizations, if it's an employee story, I need remote login. If it's customer onboarding, if it's fulfillment, I need verified address. It's going to be, we reckon SSI has been accelerated by about 2 years.
Because of Corona?
Yeah, it's kind of bittersweet.
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, if happy to take questions or talk about any or all of this.
Could you walk us through a little bit about the storage of all this data that you are collecting? Yeah, I didn't really understand that. So are you storing the data about the contracts and everything on the services side, or are you?
Everything is peer to peer. So let me. I wonder if I've got a an architectural diagram. The short answer is everything is at the edge. So the individual has a digital wallet here, and that's accessing the secure, the trusted execution environment on the device, so secure by biometric.
Yeah.
And the credentials actually come to the device and come with me. So that means we've got a new problem of key management, backup and recovery, all that stuff. So just like we're saying, hey consumer, here are the keys to your front door. You're going to start looking after those keys in a way that you're not right now. But we believe that partly that's a UX question. It's an education question. But in 1995, people didn't know what a URL was or a browser, and they learned. So we're confident that there's loads of work to do there. But the device, the credentials are actually moving peer to peer, nothing to do with the ledger, and they sit on device.
Yeah. I can also put in that the standardization work that I talked about, secure data storage, which is happening at DIP, which is a way to enable anyone to provide you with storage of those credentials, but it's talking in an encrypted way, and it's a standardized API, which allows into the interoperability that's needed. So you can, as a wallet provider, can now say, okay, I'm going to go and take this secure storage and I'm going to put the data there and ask the user if that's okay, of course, or he can bring his own data storage that he decided to have and say, this is where I'm going to store data, and have people go pick them up on data. And you kind of just say, go there, pick up what you need, and it's a standardized API, so it's actually, the data is actually curable, and it's curable based on schemas that is inside the verifiable credentials, which Jamie just talked about, that the organizations define the schemas of their data.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
And by the way, just to finish it, that's from the individual's perspective. But organizations who issue credentials, they will also have a digital wallet, and they will create new public-private key pairs for every unique relationship, and that private key will exist with the issuer, and private keys will exist with the verifier. So key management is the Achilles heel here, and to Snorri's point, you can put the data wherever you want, but who's got the keys?
Exactly.
If you're not in control of your keys, and the unsolved question yet is, will consumers care, and do they want to care? And if it's not their wallet, then whose is it, and who's got control? Because there is a great amount of concern about how that gets handled, and how key management's going to surface. But we've got answers for some of that.
Yeah. Cool. There's not any other questions, so we can say thank you, Jamie.
Perfect.
And move on, guys, already.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Snorri.
If you guys are ready, we can.
Yeah, since we're working now. So
wonderful.
So let's see.
See if you can get screen sharing working.
Yeah.
I heard it's difficult.
There you go.
Oh, so what we're looking at here is, or like, maybe I should start with the background. We sort of went our own way with this. We started looking at the space, and like Snorri said, there are a lot of initiatives and a lot of work being done on governance and a lot of different implementations. And we looked at all of that and we were like, this is a jungle. We don't even know where to start. So let's just build something instead. So we sort of did our own thing and ended up in making a lot of the same decisions, really, that have been made in other initiatives, which I think sort of just proves that these are good ways of solving these problems. So what we're looking at here on the left is the application. And when you first create an account, you create a signing key. so the user can prove they are, and you also get to choose where to put your data. Like right now, we support you can enter your Dropbox credentials if you want to. You can also choose in memory for ephemeral storage, which is quick and easy. So let's pick that one. And then it creates a key and it registers with the operator and tells the operator, like, hi, I'm a user, here's my public key. You can store my data over here. And then a user visits the service. We got the example service there on the right. And you press the login button and you get a QR which contains the information needed to identify the service. And then you open that on the phone. And then this is then that QR contains a JVT. All of our messages are JVTs, which are signed by the issuer of them. And so the phone verifies that data comes from the service. And here is where trust is first established. The phone gets the key from the URL of the service. So the URL is the identifier, and it just gets the key that is hosted there. So we basically use HTTPS and DNS to sort of bootstrap trust. And after this point, that key is used to verify all the messages that are received from the service. And now the service asks for a bunch of information, like it asks for permissions to store and read different points of information. If you click on one of those, like personal information, so it requests rights to read and to write, and we try to make this sort of match GDPR, where it doesn't display that, but internally, all this. We also have support for having different, what you call different lawful bases for information handling, since Eigendata is sort of based on the exchange of information. So right now we want to read and write a bunch of information about me, and if I then accept that, the phone will, or the app will create keys for each of those data points. And it will encrypt those keys and send it to the service. And also send an approval to the service that says like, oh, I want to sign up. This is my ID. And it generates a unique ID for every relationship with a service, so that a user cannot be tracked across different services, because there's not one user ID. You have a different ID for every relationship you have with a service. And then you're logged in, and now you can enter data there. And that data then gets encrypted and stored in the storage that you specified, and is only readable by you and by this service. And for encrypted storage, we use JVEs. And then you can log out and log in again. And this time, if you scan that QR code, the app recognizes that, oh, I already have a relationship here. So instead of establishing a new one, I ask if I want to log in, and if you click yes, then you send basically a signed JVT to the service saying like, this is my ID. I wanna log in with this browser session, and the service verifies that it is indeed signed by the key associated with that user, and you're in. So the basic problem we wanted to solve was to have data exchange between two parties that could not be read by the infrastructure, so that the government agency could host infrastructure that could be used to exchange sensitive information without them being liable for that information and without exposing it in any way, legal or technical. And that's sort of because all of the data is signed by the writer of the data. We have sort of emergent decentralized identity here. Because if I have a piece of data from the tax agency that says that, oh, I am Adam, and it's signed by the tax agency, and you can verify that signature, then I can give you access to that data, and essentially then I am proving that I am this person. So it was not something that we really set out to build, but it is definitely something that if you have secure data exchange where the data can be verified, you have decentralized identity as well. And like I said, all the data is encrypted and it's totally unreadable by the infrastructure. And as mentioned in the previous presentation, like the really difficult part is really key management and key exchange. That's like 80% of what makes this tricky is how do you exchange keys in a good way. And you don't want to reuse keys. We want to use different keys for different data sets and really make it as granular as possible. And when you're sharing data between services, it also needs to be re-encrypted with the new key and etc. But the user always has read access to all data. So the user's key is always used to encrypt everything. And yeah, and also since you as a user can choose where to store the information, it gives you a lot of control over where your information goes, and you can always port it to somewhere else. So there's an interesting problem here in that we also don't want to let the users choose a really bad place to store their data, because that will degrade the performance of the service. So it's a sort of a governance problem of how to view that we're still working on.
Cool.
And yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you guys have kind of gone your own way, and the infrastructure architecture you basically made. I usually say that it looks like decentralized identity, and it basically works like it. And then you have that interoperability case. That's where standardization comes in. Like if that was possible, then you basically had decentralized identity, a self-sovereign identity. So it's a really cool case.
Yeah, and I also think that's the way forward. It's to start to exchange parts of Eigendata for standardized parts.
Yeah.
So now we understand the domain, and we have built something that sort of works and that solves all of these problems. But of course, I don't think the future is that everyone's going to run our implementation, that it's completely non-standard, then sort of poorly documented.
Yeah.
But we will instead use that as a springboard for creating a better solution.
Yeah. Now, this is actually a good layover to DIN. We're going a little bit over here, but I think it's important that we kind of let everybody through. So DIN is part of that. Will make sure that we all try to work on the right approach. So Nina, you want to take it away?
Yeah. Is it okay if I just ask one question to Adam? Or yeah, is it so that like the university will be able to, like, if I put in some education, the university would be able to verify that I have indeed studied and have this degree, or is it something anyone can input whatever they want?
No, so any party can input whatever they want.
Yeah.
And then it says who wrote this information, and then you can verify that it was indeed this organization that wrote this information. So if it is if your university writes information there that it says that you have a medical degree and you also have phony university.biz writes that you also have a law degree, then I mean I can verify that phony university.biz wrote that you have a law degree, and then I have to decide, do I trust that organization or not? And
cool. That's all I was wondering about. I feel I always feel slightly guilty being the last speaker because everyone, you know, just wants to have dinner. But I'll do my best to keep this interesting. And I think maybe the best way to keep this interesting is actually, you guys are mostly not Norwegian. The Norwegian people in this group I already know. So what I think, because DIN, Digital Identity Nordics, is about introducing this mindset and enabling the success of different solutions. And well, we're starting in Norway because that's where we're located, but we would like to, you know, expand and include and collaborate with those initiatives which already exist and are perhaps more mature in the other Scandinavian countries. But I think Snorre started this talk by saying that we're far behind in Scandinavia, and I think what he meant is Norway. And I'd just like to explain why that is, if it's okay with you guys. Because we've been talking about for 10 years now getting new ID cards, and it hasn't happened. So it's sort of a strange society in that sense. You work in the public sector, Leo, so you can confirm this, but you don't actually see a lot of top-down action, like we're just gonna introduce this and this is how it's gonna be. That never works here. It doesn't. And at the same time, you never get the bottom-up kind of action either, like the people demand something. No, I mean, Norway is built on what we call the three-party cooperation, which is between the state and the unions and the employers and the workplaces. So it's actually, you could say, if something is, this is my interpretation, but if something is going to happen on this scale, you have to have the big corporations involved, because you don't actually have civil society in Norway. People execute their will through different organizations, either unions or their workers' organizations. So it's we're a very high trust society, right? But you were talking about bank ID earlier, Snorre, which does the main job of verifying your identity when you log on to various services, be it state, medical, bank, whatever. And even they try to introduce some solution which helps you, you know, send over personal information and not just verify your identity. And even they didn't get any traction. So what we are looking to do is to you know, enable this to be a success. And now I'll jump over to my presentation. Ska vi se. Yeah. Do you guys see now?
Yep.
Good. So, Digital Identity Nordics, who are we and what do we want? So I got some feedback that I had to work on my pitch. So this is one of the pitches, and you should give me some feedback afterwards how it works, if it's too nerdy. But this is one of them, and maybe too nerdy. So first, we're trying to define the problem. And I like history, so I thought I'd use a historical metaphor. And this is probably something many of you guys have heard before, but maybe not. I mean, in Europe, like 1,000 years ago, we had slavery, we had serfdom, we had treller in Norwegian, and probably the same in Swedish. And in a certain sense, if we look at their situation, we can maybe understand our own, although it's not so extreme or bad. So they have no ownership. They don't have any money. Everything is barter. They trade their work for shelter. They trade their work for a plot of land to grow their vegetables and maybe survive to the next year. But the place where they work, the place where they trade in order to get this basic necessity, which is shelter and land, they have no alternatives. They try to run away and work for the neighbor farm. They get, killed because they're not allowed to leave. There is no innovation, really, because you're not allowed to create a better life. There's no mobility, there's no capital, there's no freedom. So there's no incentives to improve your life. There's no incentives to create better services. And of course, there's no security because your life is not your own. You don't really decide what goes on. And of course, we have it equally bad because we have digital serfdom. I'm not going to say we have no ownership, but we have little ownership. We have little ownership of our data. And basically, we're, again, bartering a very bad deal. We're giving over large amounts of data for basic goods. And it's not really proportional. Doesn't follow data minimalism. There are few alternatives, right? Because we have these new necessary basic services, which are called Google and Facebook and Amazon and more. And there are a few privacy-friendly alternatives. Data portability is apparently a right, but it's not really yet an option. We have suboptimal innovation, as you guys all know, because data is locked in company silos. And we have low security because our data is already out there, making us vulnerable to abuse and identity theft. But in our history, luckily something happened. A couple of hundred years went by, and certain things were put in motion, and then suddenly you had like the Renaissance, you had the Enlightenment period, you had ownership. People controlled their property, they controlled their income, and it allowed people to create a better life. Because with freedom and capital, you're able to amass money, or able to create some sort of tool that will make your farm work more efficient, and suddenly you have science, you have real inventions, and you have a market economy, you have banks and value creation and new services being created, and you have basic security. I mean, people didn't have the same rights that they do now, of course, but you have a rule of law, you have the very first rudimentary societal safety nets. So, we're getting there. And this is what we want. I don't need to preach to you guys because you guys already know this. We want ownership of our data as a resource. And as with money, we want to, give access to whoever wants it and not have it locked down. Because we also want innovation. We want our data to be combined in new ways. We want for there to be the alternatives that startups and scale-ups are already trying to provide. We want them to actually be able to operate in the Nordics, because right now it's too difficult for them to operate. And we, of course, want the security. If we're going to have this ability to send out our data freed from the silos, we also need the security to withdraw it and to control it. And this is a paradigm shift that I think that either you're inside this mentality or you're outside. And if you're outside, then it's often hard to explain this in a good way. And that's partially on us, but it's also that it's so hard for people to start thinking about this if they don't already do. For instance, there is no fundamental, this idea of trading your money and giving it away to whoever you want. It frightens a lot of people, especially since there already is so much data transfer. For some people, the goal is to minimize the amount of data that is transferred. Instead, we should be thinking that we should control and empower users, give users control and empowerment to be in charge of this transaction. So, there's a lot of work to be done there. So we are a group of people, of professionals, of experts throughout Norwegian society in the public and private sector. And we have basically started talking together and started to form a group. We would like to act as a facilitator between the public and the private sector, and to actually be a resource and a think tank for the government and for the people and the private companies as to what this is and what value is there for you. So our goal right now is to make a legal, a technological, and a business value-oriented roadmap for the Nordics. Because from where I see things, the problem that we need to overcome in at least Norway, the discussion that goes on in the newspapers is very much about, can people be trusted to handle their own data? How much autonomy should people be given? What role should consent have in data transactions? Who owns data? What? How do you cross? When is data owned by the company? When is data owned by the person? So this is not something that can be decided in a day. It's something that needs to be decided through dialogue, because that's how everything is decided in Norway, and it will take time, and you will have to have the industry organizations involved, the businesses, and the government. And that's how things are done, and that's how things have to be done. But I think it's also important for us to explain what we are not doing, because this causes a lot of confusion. And also, who are we trying to help, and who are we not competing with? We're not here to create standards. We're not here to determine which standards are to be chosen. We just want to organize, collect, and present best practices in the field and let other people make that decision. We will perhaps offer suggestions as to what we think is the right way forward, but we're not here to, create the wheel anew. And we're also not here to make a commercial platform for data ownership, because we get that question a lot. Because there's enough people who are trying to do this in Norway, and the fact is they're not able to, because the environment is not right, because there's so many legal boundary hurdles for them to cross, and all of these ethical data management questions that I just mentioned. Can people be trusted? How do you? There is not enough. There is not a way forward for them to just jump into this market yet. So someone needs to pave the way for them. And we actually only had a kickoff in February, and we have, I think, achieved quite a bit so far. We've made a website and other fundamentals. LinkedIn, Twitter, email, newsletter, design, website. We've contributed to the parliamentary white paper with 12 co-authors on data economy and innovation, where we lay out our thought and how we think the Norwegian government could, strategically move forward on this. We've been interviewed in the largest technical newspaper with a call to action, and we've gotten a lot of attention. We've started a research project in collaboration with NTNU, which is the largest and most prestigious technical university in Norway. Maybe you want to say a few words on that, Snorre?
Yeah, it's a very interesting project, because the consortium is big. There's a lot of important players in there. And it's very technical focused, and the main focus is there not to create standards, not to create closed modules, but it's actually to make sure that everything that, for example, Evernym builds is built in an open manner, so that anyone in Norway can go and say, hey, I'm going to take this and this component and start offering this decentralized identity that now is available, so that we get that interoperability. So the project is highly technical. Again, it has not been accepted yet, but it's been delivered. So we are very, very positive that we might have a chance at this because of the consortium and also the expertise that's been pulled into the project.
So that's really cool and exciting. Yeah, and what are we doing now? And do you want to contribute? Since we're so early, we're still actually just reaching out to different companies and governance bodies and major stakeholders. And actually, we don't have time to answer everyone. We need to take them one by one because there's so many people who want to have a conversation with us and actually be part of this group. So there are still some doors that need to be opened, and we would of course appreciate help with that, because as I said earlier, for this to work, we need to have the major stakeholders on board. And we're of course working on acquiring funding so we can continue to stay free and open and not charge any membership fees. So here we would also appreciate help. And we're establishing working groups within law, which is, you know, the legal framework, mapping the legal hurdles, looking at regulation and standardization, which is also, I guess, technology group. We're looking at use cases and business value and what's in it for me from, you know, the different kinds of companies and industries. And the fourth group sort of sews it all together and would give input to different sandboxing communities in Norway. Of course, we're looking at Norway right now. So what we need are professionals who want to be a part of these groups, who want to get to know other leaders in the field, in the Nordics and internationally, who want to represent us outwards and really become an expert. So here we're also talking to different people, and if you guys know anyone or if you want to be a part of it now, that would be really good. And also, you know, we would like to have non-Norwegian people as well, because you guys, I believe, have come further than us in this area. So that's what we're working on right now. Oh, yeah. So that was my presentation.
Then we can go back 2 slides, and we have some words from Leo, and one of our core, core contributors to DIN as well, which is really key.
I don't need to go back. He can just.
Oh, I don't like slides. Yeah, well, first some fun facts. Snorre, you mentioned the Kenneth incident. I was actually the incident manager of Altinn at in 2012. So that actually, so I come from the Altinn organization. Altinn is government collaborative platform that is owned by now almost 60 different government organizations in Norway. It's a service platform that also have, we've been doing what we call authorization. It is actually a form of verifiable credentials from a centralistic point of view since 2003. And my journey through that organization has basically made me see and feel a lot of the problems we are talking about today. Really, I've been getting a really close look on them. The last years, I've been working mostly with innovation and business development for Altinn, and in a quite broad perspective. So one of basically my tasks is to understand what's happening. Where is the world going? Where should our attention go? What should we focus on in our next strategy? And so on. So for me, yeah, Snorre also mentioned the Digital Me report that we made last year. That was actually a work where the starting point was, okay, what kind of what's happening with the demands to the trust infrastructure when we start making complex services with multiple data sources? What happens when we start making algorithmic decisions? What happens? How is the demands for public infrastructure driven by those new technologies that are already here. And I must say, even though I've been following this field and the My Data movement and so on for quite some years now, I was quite mind blown, because to me there is an aspect, I think Nina came into it a little bit, but we're talking about privacy, but in my kind of world, it's actually a matter of personal integrity in the digital realm. Yeah, I see my kids, they spend almost half their time in digital realms, but they have no personal integrity. What psychological effect will that have on them? What will that do with society in a bit longer terms? And then we come into trust levels. There is some really important democratic aspects here. I've been working on this for a few years, and now I work in the Directorate for Digitization, which is a government body that tries to coordinate all the virtualization of government, actually in Norway. And we also provide some kind of common frameworks, like a common architectural framework for government, and some common solutions, like the identity portal for government services. So I think one thing that hasn't really been mentioned that much here today, but one of, I think, the what can we say, kind of common that we all have is the ambitions and the work that's going on in the European Union right now, and the European blockchain partnership in particular. I think they have some really great visions. If they succeed in implementing half of them, they're going to be a major player, because they're basically trying to connect the market and transactions and trust across the entire European Union. And also, I think another really important aspect, because we're basically talking about somehow digital value systems here, and I think if you look like to the east, you have the more like authoritarian regimes. If you look to the west and the US, you have the market liberalism, and in Europe we have our kind of combination of those two. We are quite strongly regulated, with the focus on personal freedom, democracy, stability, so on. But on the other side, we're also trying to create open and functioning markets where innovation can happen, so on. So we're following the work, and we're also within some of the working groups in the European Blockchain Partnership. And we're trying to engage in the community, which I'm doing right now, and trying to listening to people that are much smarter than ourselves, like you guys, in order to better understand what should the government do, what should the next identity framework provided by the government or utilized by the government. How can we basically go from putting electricity on paper forms, how can we take the step from there to a true virtual government that will cost much less money to facilitate, but that would still ensure democracy and trust between people, companies, and government. So yeah, that's our kind of stake in this work. And also, I think it's quite obvious we're a quite major player and consumer of identity. So how we move forward would be actually it will have some significance for the Norwegian market and so on. So we're also quite interested in trying to level the ground for competition and for the market, so that not the big players that are already established, which basically can have some interest in upholding status quo, won't just simply succeed in that, because we have like national versions of big tech as well. And then also some oh no, sorry, I forgot what I was. I had one more point, but it wasn't important because I forgot it.
No, one thing you can mention, Leo, is like we talked earlier today about what a point you guys have been put up into a box, basically in a priority box.
Yeah, like now the European work on self-sovereign identity and the single digital gateway initiative in Europe, it's quite high up on our roadmap, and we're trying to build understanding across public sector in Norway that we also have to relate to the world outside of Norway when we build the solutions, because as Snorre said, we're getting more and more global citizens, we're interacting across borders, but also I think it's a matter of securing a kind of digital sovereignty for as a nation, because I mean, you have in Norway, you have really great rights as a citizen or as a company. You have a lot of legal protection in what you do, and you have some obligations. So we should make a kind of, turf up here where companies and individuals that want to interact with the Norwegian system can onboard really easy, can create value and take pleasure of all the rights and benefits that comes with interacting with the Norwegian system. So and I think we see, I think especially Estonia has come quite far in that kind of mindset. Maybe due to the sense of urgency and pure necessity from their historical context and geographic context, but they have this digital onboarding for startups in Estonia, where you can actually start up a company and get the identity and so on without actually putting a foot in Estonia physically.
Initiative. But thanks, Leo. I think that we covered a lot of key aspects here, and to kind of cater to everybody's time, I think we're gonna cut it off here. But I think everybody has been able to share their vision, and there's a question from Christian first, and we can continue.
Yeah, wonderful to hear you, Leo. And I just want to add one thing when you're thinking about strategy and data, and I think it's regarding jobs and innovation. We always talk about reducing cost and making things easy and efficient, but we have to also include job creation and innovation in that when we're talking about these issues, because as you say, all this data is gathering up in centralized locations on the east and on the west, but if that continues, we are not going to have any sovereignty over our data. And in the end, if you also add AI and machine learning on top of that, there's not going to be any innovation left for us, because we don't going to have access or control or access to the data itself. So I think when making strategies for a country, not only for the government side but also kind of for the innovation and the commercial side, we have to make sure that the data we are producing, as you say, your kids spend and we all spend a lot of time online, and that data needs to be somewhere where you can actually add have control of that, so you can send it off to innovation here locally.
Yeah, I don't even need to comment on that, because I totally agree.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate everybody showing up and actually spending 2 hours with us here. Will all be available later, so you can use it for your own material and be able to kind of share it with others that might have the same interests. if anyone is interested, I will be hanging out a little bit on this water cooler. Let's see, you're just gonna get the link here somewhere. Let's find it. There, yeah. I will be hanging out here a little bit if anyone wants to discuss, so that we can maybe get some of the attendees as well. Cannot promise anything, but I will be there. So we will, if anyone wants to discuss some more, we can go over there. Perfect. Thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.